What would be normal in Europe but horrifying in the US? Calling someone a cunt. My boss is from the UK and tosses that word around so much our HR had to remind him Americans do not view that word the same as the British. ETA. All right. I appreciate all the upvotes, but I'm going to mute this now because I have work in the morning and have to mentally prepare for the Monday cunt storm. Here in Ireland, that's usually a term of endearment. Funny cunt, mad cunt, gas cunt, etc. Such a versatile word, though. You really don't know what you're missing. I don't mind it, but I grew up watching a lot of British comedy, so I was pretty used to it before I realized it makes people clutch their pearls. I remember meeting a French girl who was visiting the US, and I mentioned how Europeans don't seem fazed by cunt, and that surprises Americans. She said she's surprised that people in the US aren't more offended by son of a bitch. We brushed that one off, but she was pointing out they would never let someone insult their mother like that. I feel like us Americans don't even consider the mother part of the insult. In Germany, it's kind of similar regarding the word son of a bitch. I remember when I was younger, it was a horrible insult, and every time someone was called a Hurensohn, which is the German word for son of a bitch, it lead to a fight. Nowadays, though, it's much more harmless, and most people don't consider their mother as part of the insult. But I can't speak for everyone, OFC. Hijo de puta in Latin America is the same. Your own mom will call you son of a bitch if you misbehave, then kill you when you point out she is the bitch in that scenario. Ah ha ha. It's a noun, verb, and an adjective. You're a cunty cunning cunt is a perfectly acceptable phrase in the correct circumstances. I'm from the UK and I've worked on building sites. I can't be in a job where something so simple, such as being called a cunt, was a HR issue. Say what you want about foul-mouthed common as muck tradesmen, but there's something so cathartic about just being able to tell someone to fuck off or call them a cunt, and it's all taken in jest. There's very little pent-up anger. You go to work the next day and you're still at the very least amicable with each other, but most of the time you've or they have said your piece and you're back to goofing around with each other. Very little of the insults are taken seriously, even if they genuinely mean it at the time. That, and if I reported that someone called me a cunt on a building site, I'd be laughed off of the job site before anything happened to the person I'm reporting. This is because in the US it's still primarily a gendered slur that's directed only at women. Men are never called cunt unless influenced by British usage. For most of the US, calling a man a cunt would be like calling a white person the N-word, nonsensical. Not tipping. I tried not tipping in other countries. I was not prepared for how rude I felt despite fully knowing it's not expected or common. In my discomfort, I just split the middle and left half the usual tip I normally would. LOL. On the bright side, 100% of all servers I had were very thankful, which is not the same reaction I get in the US where it's customary and considered more a part of the bill. Please stop doing that. This tipping bullshit is starting to spread elsewhere because of tourists. Yes, please do not export the tipping bullshit. Restaurants here in Indonesia have a service charge in lieu of a tip, and minimum wage laws apply to waiters and waitresses just like any other job. American tipping is a cancer that should not be spread to non-tipping countries. Yeah, it's a normal thing in the US because they all get paid $7 per hour and expect to make up the rest of their wages through tips. The servers lose, you lose, and the only people winning are the restaurant owners paying rock-bottom wages. That's the usual explanation, but in California, we don't have a separate lower minimum wage for tip jobs, and the expected tip percentage is the same as the rest of the country. Tip culture is very popular amongst those who receive tips. Yeah, it is the explanation. Just because one state attempted to change it but couldn't, because it's a nationwide habit which is decades in the making, does not in any way counteract the well-known reason why it has become this way. It's not just California. 7 states total do not have a separate lower minimum wage for tipped jobs. Besides California, the other states where servers make full state minimum wage and not a tipped wage are Washington, Oregon, Alaska, Minnesota, Montana, and Nevada. Then there are states and U.S. territories that pay below minimum wage but above the federal tipped wage. For example, Hawaii's minimum wage is $14 per hour, but for tipped workers, their hourly wage is $12.75 per hour, and their maximum tip credit is $1.25 per hour. In Arizona, minimum wage is $14.35 per hour for non-tipped employees and $11.35 per hour for tipped employees with a maximum tip credit of $3 per hour. This is also different from states that pay tipped workers the federal tip wage of $2.13 per hour. Source: If this makes you feel better about not tipping, the whole reason for tipping culture in America is, if I'm remembering correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, because they refused to pay black waiters, so they had to survive off tips to receive any pay. You aren't being rude by not tipping in a country that hasn't had this historical background. Drinking alcohol in public spaces. In many European cities, it's perfectly acceptable to enjoy a drink in parks or on the streets, while in the US, it can lead to fines or legal issues. Also drinking at 18 in bars, or even 16. 3 pints and 3 carvery dinners, please. I went to Florida 20 years ago with the family when I was 15. It was my brother's 18th birthday, and we were with a large group of Brits having an organized BBQ at this resort. Of course, my brother drank, and as a 15-year-old Brit, I had been a seasoned drinker for 3 years. The horrified looks me and my brother got when Americans seen us with a beer was hilarious. The Brits with us, including my parents, didn't bat an eye. Here's an interesting fact about the drinking age in the US. At the federal level, it's technically 18 and that no state is allowed to lower it beyond that. But federal funding for the maintenance of interstate highways is contingent on that particular state keeping the drinking age at 21. Thus far, no state has been willing to lose that funding. Yeah, and this was due to a lot of pressure on the federal government from MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I did a report on teen drinking when I was in high school and was surprised to learn about that. In most states, parents can provide alcohol to their children. A glass at dinner is perfectly okay. Of course, you can't be letting your kids raid the liquor cabinet on the regular. At the very least, if CPS heard about it, they would harass you very effectively. The law doesn't totally ban drinking by minors, but it definitely does ban the sale to minors and drinking in public. In high school, I would brew beer with my dad. It was a fun bonding experience, taught me some real-world chemistry, and developed a taste for decent beer. It was brilliant nice by my dad. It removed the allure of going out to the woods to drink and made it so I didn't like the taste of shit beer. Looking at you, Milwaukee's best. I started letting my kids taste my beer and wine from when they first asked, maybe 8 or 10 years old. They predictably hated it by the time they were 14 or so, and we knew they and their friends were beginning to experiment with alcohol. I tried again. Communions, bar mitzvahs, house parties, etc. They hated it less but tried to pretend they were cool with it. By the time they were seniors in high school and ready to go to college, we knew they had familiarity with it. Drinking didn't happen in binges. It wasn't being rebellious, it's part of life. Mission accomplished. The German Foreign Ministry has a travel advisory that you should not photograph your own children naked when you are in the USA at the beach. In Germany, it is quite normal for small children to bathe naked on public beaches or in swimming pools. They are correct. Most of the US would recognize taking a cute picture of your baby taking a bath, for instance, is a non-sexual thing, but it definitely falls within the technical bounds of some anti-child porn laws. It didn't used to, but it does now. When I was a kid in the 70s, it was a rite of passage to have a naked butt picture in the bathtub as either a baby or toddler. And even if something isn't illegal doesn't mean you won't get into trouble. I've heard about mom getting investigated by police for child pornography because she stored image of skin of her child to send to doctor. Some AI recognized child and skin and flagged someone's private photo and reported it to police. We are living in messed up time where common sense got replaced with imperfect automated systems and blunt one-sided laws. Edit. It might actually have been dad. Just to add to the whole child thing, letting your first, second grade kiddos go alone to school by foot and or public transport. It's fairly normal here. Your parents show it to you a few times and that's that. You're saying that's normal in Germany or the US? Because kids bike their own way to school in very small American towns when the school is within walkable distance. But the vast majority are miles and miles away from most people's houses, so it would be pretty wild if they were expected to walk there. LOL. Back in elementary school, I wanted to walk to school so bad because I saw it in movies. And my mom had to explain to me that we lived miles outside of town on back roads and I would probably get hit by a car. Meanwhile, I live in a suburban area, but my middle school was officially a no-walkers school. Even though I lived down across the street from it and there was a sidewalk path to get to it. It's because the school is on the other side of a 4-lane road, and at the time, there wasn't much pedestrian infrastructure. Nowadays there is, and you can easily walk to the school as they built up the neighborhood and added a light and a few crosswalks. A no-walkers school seems like an only in America thing, haha. Most European cities and big towns have kindergarten/school within 1 to 2 kilometers, usually in the center of housing blocks, and the paths there are quite low traffic enough that a kid can get there just fine. My wife is a K-5 teacher and there are still walkers, but I'm sure you're right that the prevalence is much higher in Europe. Most kids are either bused or driven by their parents. Her school just had to make a rule about how early cars could start queuing because some parents would literally arrive 3 hours before dismissal to not be in a massive line of cars. People have really lost perspective. For my part, I walked or biked to school from age 7 or 8 onward. Nudity in TV and print media. Just generally considering nudity non-sexual. Explaining Finnish sauna to Americans is an interesting experience. The idea that nudity can be non-sexual is often a revelation. In saying that, however, I know quite a few Americans that have really embraced the sauna culture. It's too fucking hot to be horny in a sauna. The fear of nudity here is crazy to me. People will let their kids play the most violent, bloodiest games to ever exist, but will absolutely freak the fuck out of. They find out there's a scene with a bare boob, even just for a split second. It's just so bizarre. I remember when the youth of America was corrupted when they saw Janet Jackson's nipple for zero point 0.4 seconds. I am an expat living in Europe that visited London for the first time a few years back. Turned on my TV in my hotel room and had to double-check that I hadn't inadvertently ordered something when I saw full frontal nudity. Turns out it's some regular game show where contestants try to judge their match based on looks alone and then they switch genders. Good times. I felt great about my body afterwards. Naked Attraction. Is a pretty trashy show, but a fun watch. I know this one. The size of parking spaces. Parking spaces in the US are 1.5x bigger than those of Europe, almost double at Costco. European vehicles are on average very, very small, and their parking spaces reflect that. I rented as Mazda 3, and it was a pretty tight squeeze in 99% of parkades. Consider that before you decide to rent an SUV or bigger. I went to Portugal and booked an economy car. When I showed up, they were out, but since I had top-tier status, they upgraded me to a premium car. Instead, I asked them to downgrade me to a compact car. I didn't want to drive a bigger car around. Walking to the store. My mom traveled to the US for the first time recently. She was shocked at how unwalkable it was and how people went everywhere with the car. I recently moved from the US to Ireland, and it is wonderfully freeing to, for the first time in my life, not be car dependent. Except for the cab ride from the airport when we arrived, I haven't been in a car in 2+ months. Trams, buses, trains, and my own 2 legs have gotten me everywhere. It's a whole different world. This is one I'd struggle with the most. I go to the corner shop every day, 2-minute walk, and go to a local supermarket at least 3 to 4 times a week, 5-minute walk. Couldn't imagine having to jump in the car every time I needed a basic item like a pint of milk or a beer. Calling an ambulance. I've called an ambulance twice in my life for other people and not given it a second thought. It blows my mind that you'd get charged in the USA. Universal healthcare is a joke in my country, Australia, as I feel it's becoming more and more US-like. Ambos cost a pretty penny without private insurance except in Queensland, where they are still free. How much does an ambulance cost in your state? If it's under 4 figures, that's still very cheap compared to the US. In my state, NSW, it's around $450 base plus a per-kilometer charge to and from the Ambo station and the hospital. In most other states, it's around $1,000 flat fee if it's a van. If you need a helicopter, expect to pay your firstborn. Yikes, that's pricey. I'm American, but I live in Canada right now, and the most expensive province for ambulance, Alberta, is a few hundred for a ride, but definitely not 1,000+. I drove myself to the emergency room for a coral snake bite. They didn't have the anti-venom. I had to go to the hospital. They called me an ambulance despite the fact that I had already driven there, and I said I didn't want one. Total hospital bill was $94K, and the ambulance was a separate $3K that dropped to like $1K after I gave them my insurance. As a Belgian, my mind is really blown about this. $94K? How do they expect average civilians are going to pay that? Or do you guys take a mortgage to pay a hospital bill? They don't. You have to go and demand them give you an itemized bill detailing every charge. Then the bill magically turns into a $10K, $15K bill. Insurance companies all have negotiated discounts with hospitals and such. So hospitals have to jack up prices to tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they still profit after insurance companies shaft them. When they realize you don't have insurance, they discount it down to the post-shafting price. Man, totally unthinkable down here. Besides our mandatory general medical insurance, which costs almost nothing, a lot of people have an additional insurance for a few tens a month which covers all hospital bills, often paid by our employer. That explains why here in the States we commonly get charged per pill for medications given, and we are absolutely forbidden in some hospitals from bringing any outside medications even if they are prescribed by our primary care doctor. Everything has to be given to you by a nurse or member of hospital staff. And an aspirin, single pill mind you, will often be charged at something like $75, $150 per dose. A family friend was put into the hospital for a mild stroke, and during her stay, they asked her if she would consent to trying some new anti-clotting injection to improve her chances of not having a secondary stroke. She consented, and when she got the itemized bill, that single shot was charged at $100,000, and her insurance initially refused to cover it because it wasn't covered due to unknown billing code. This is the hell of the US healthcare system we deal with here. But, as pointed out previously, those extortion charges magically drop by order of magnitude at some point with no explanation. Usually for most people, that is around the time it goes to collections for medical collections companies to fight over. Actually, the outside drugs thing is due to liability. They have no way to prove the outside drug is the drug you say it is. However, if a drug they give you interacts with a drug you took that they didn't know about because you thought it was something else, or if they cause you to overdose, you thought you took a smaller dose of your drug, they are still liable for what happens while you're in their care. To keep themselves legally safe, they decided that the best course of action is simply no outside drugs. The price being per pill and overpriced is a completely different issue. Agreed on the outside medicine thing. My issue is when they charge you for the meds they give you, and then charge you a second time for physically handing you the pills. I got a $1,600 bill for an ER visit, no insurance, simply didn't pay it, and after a couple months it magically dropped to $500. The whole American medical system is a scam. Insurance companies scamming hospitals, hospitals scamming patients, and insurance companies paying off Congress to ensure it never gets fixed. So just a money-making machine on the back of plebs. Right. The American medical system charges you and your insurer whatever they think they can get you to cough up, not anything remotely related to how much the services actually cost them. And people have to play these stupid games because you can't just avoid medical care. So you have someone like me. I got sent a $1,600 bill for something very minor at a time when I had no insurance due to having lost my job. I decided to just ignore the bill and take the hit to my credit instead. At one point, I called the hospital and told them I couldn't pay, and they told me to put in an application to my state's Medicaid program for the cost, which would then get denied due to the income level of my new job, and then to send them the denial letter and they'd get most of the bill waived. Ridiculous. But if I was dumb and had the money, I might have just paid up the bill they sent me in full. It's a system that's beyond broken, and medical debt is still the leading cause of bankruptcy in the US. Eating dinner at 10 p.m. In Europe, it's just a normal night out, but in the US, you'd be met with confused looks and a few, "Are you planning to party with the vampires?" Ha ha ha. Only south of Europe, unfortunately. I'm in Denmark and every kitchen closes before 9. I had such a great time in Spain eating tapas at 10 and going out at 12. Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe and comment, are you thinking is normal in Europe and not in US? Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.